Okay, so evening boys and girls, welcome to the class. We're going to start ahead in about a minute as soon as everyone else arrives. Okay, numbers are coming in, that's looking good. All right, so let's begin. Okay, and away. Well, slideshow from beginning. Cool. All right, so kicking off from where we were last week with the Carnivores, this week we're going into the Feliforms, cats and their kin. So, of course, every week or every class we do the books of the week, and this week is a really good book that I've actually only got on PDF. I haven't got a hard copy. It's the story of Earth and life from a Southern African perspective. So, absolutely brilliant book. It focuses more on geology, but specifically with South African geology, and it's a fascinating story if you want to learn about how the continents were formed and specifically how the Southern African continent was formed. And just how everything connects together and where the plants and animals fit into the whole equation. And you know me, I love my evolution, I love my biological history, and I just think that everyone should just get this book if you can find it. It's very hard to find in a bookstore, but if you can, go out and get it. Okay, so today we're focusing on Feliforms, and Feliforms, unlike Carnivores, are considered to be the true carnivores. They're considered to be hypercarnivores as an exclusively carnivorous. There are some exceptions, but we're going to discuss them not this lesson, but next lesson. All right, so going back to where we were, carnivores are meat eaters, and that doesn't just necessarily mean meat, it means any animal product. And they have carnacal teeth, which are those highly modified molars, which are designed to grind and shred meat as opposed to grind nuts or grind any sort of hard fibrous material. And carnivores, because they are predatory animals and they are built for intercepting and grabbing onto prey, they have fused bones in their feet to greater or lesser degrees. The Carnivores have very fused feet, the Feliforms have less fused, and we'll look at that today as well. And one of the benefits of having less fused feet is that it gives them more flexibility, and this helps with climbing and grappling. And we're going to talk about cats specifically with that. Okay, so compared to the Carnivores, Feliforms have a far more developed carnacal shear. So this means that they have more of an exclusive meat-eating diet, and they usually eat large chunks of meat as opposed to ripping and tearing. And many Carnivores and Feliform carnivores are very similar. Like last week, we looked at the weasels, and they look remarkably similar to mongooses, also stoats and ferrets. And even a lot of the muscelids, their phenotypic similarities are very, very similar. And this is again convergent evolution, where we talked about where the one groups of species are dominant, the other groups tend to be absent or in fewer numbers. Okay, so of the two suborders, Feliforms and Carnivores, Feliforms are far less diverse than this, and in species count, and compared to the Carnivores, which we've talked about hundreds of species now. Guys, just put your microphones on mute, please. I don't know who that was. Okay, so going back into the skulls again, because we do love our skulls. So cat teeth are far more specialized than canine teeth. So you can look over here and you can see the canines, even though it's called canines, that's for a cat, are far more developed, far more pronounced. Also, there's an absence of teeth, and the carnacal shear is far more pronounced. They have really enlarged molars for grinding. Also, their incisors are very small, almost needle-like, compared to canines, which are more like tweezers for plucking and pulling. Again, you can also notice with the orbital sockets how much more forward they are, and we'll talk about their zygomatic ridge in a second. Compared to the Carnivores, so again, you can see the whole structure. The dentition is different. With felines, they're missing these teeth over here. Canines have got them. Also, the canines' incisors are much bigger, like tweezers, as I said. With felines, you can't really see in this picture, but they're almost needle-like. If you've got a pet cat, you know what I'm talking about. And again, those canines in comparison are substantially larger and tend to overlock each other rather than just connect to each other. Eye sockets are also substantially larger as well. So in many cases, the number of teeth are reduced, as you can see again, and the skull is modified to be vision focused rather than smell focused. They've got a very, very small nasal cavity by comparison, still excellent compared to humans and primates, but compared to the canines, it's hopeless. So what you can also see is that the eyes are extremely binocular, with them sitting right to the front of the face. Basically, their entire face is almost like a camera. They are constantly using their entire vision. They've got no part of their face that is obscuring vision. They are focused on vision, and they are just one walking telescope. And they have, again, like most of the canines, a rather robust zygomatic arch, which is that ridge that we have on the face over here. Okay, that protects the eyes from conflict, from fights, and that sort of thing. Also supports the eye sockets and makes the skull stronger but lighter at the same time. In the smaller cats, this tends to be very reduced. It's almost needle-like. I actually have a cat skull that I found in the bush, and the zygomatic arches are tiny. They're 2 little needles, and purely because the level of conflict they're engaging with. They're not taking down big, robust prey. They're not engaging with big, heavy, meaty fights with other predators. And they don't need to have all this cranial strength. They tend to be more surgical. Okay, there's a comparison over there. You can see the zygomatic arch is much smaller over there, although this was a very large house cat. Okay, and the nasal cavity is much, much smaller. The turbinate area, as we call it, is much smaller. So this is a cat's over here. Although it's quite pronounced, you can actually see the amount of surface area compared to a canine is far more reduced. Okay, again, because they don't need to use that sense of smell to the same degree the dogs do. They're not as focused on scent. Okay, so cats are highly specialized obligate carnivores. And what does this mean? Again, it means that they are almost exclusively meat eaters. I know that some domestic cats might eat whatever we're eating, but it's more because they're emulating our behavior and they learn from us. And they might feel that something's missing in their diet. If they're eating plants in the wild, it's usually because they're trying to clear their digestion. It doesn't mean they actually need the nutrition. They can't process cellulose, so that plant material is passing through them almost wholly intact and just scrubbing them out like a toothbrush. So they don't actually eat the material so much as just pass it. Okay, so while in the past there were numerous species of social cats, saber-toothed cats in particular, the majority today are solitary. We talked about that last week with the canines displacing cats in many areas, and social cats have been displaced by social canines because they're just better at their job. And today there are 2 subfamilies of cats today, the PANTHERINAE and the FELIDAE. Okay, so how do we group cats? Apart from their size, the 2 super subfamilies have very different hyoid apparatus bones. And what is a hyoid apparatus? Actually, you've got one as well. And it's a connection between the tongue, and it's a series of bones between the tongue and the voice box, and this actually helps facilitate movement and creating sounds. And the shape and the functioning of it affects the vocalizations. And the way it's built between the 2 groups, between the pantherians and the felids, is very different and leads to very different forms of vocal communication. So simply put, the hyoid apparatus affects what sounds a cat can make. So cats that roar are unable to truly purr. So the roaring cats, the pantherian cats. This is because they have a length of tough cartilage in the hyoid process. The hyoid apparatus, hyoid process, same thing. And it actually, although it gives them that really robust, meaty sound, that roar that we've been so impressed with lions and tigers and leopards, and those strong grunting sounds that comes from that rich cartilage structure, it doesn't give them that purring function. They can emulate that grunting like purr, but it is not a true purr as what a cat does, as what we conventionally call cat, house cat. Okay, cats that meow can purr. They have a far more underdeveloped hyoid process, and this allows them to purr. And there's strong evidence that purring actually encourages bone growth. So there's been a lot of studies into why cats purr, and it's not just because they're comfortable. They do it whether they're on their own on groups, and they usually do when they're at rest. And there's been a lot of evidence to show that it actually promotes bone growth and recovery of cartilage, and being that cats are very dexterous animals and prone to injuries, that this vibrations throughout their body actually encourages rapid bone growth, giving them almost superhero powers. And it's impressive, and there's been a lot of evidence to show into this, so the jury's still out, but it's a strong suggestion, and a lot of major zoological studies are going into the purring process, and it's not just because they enjoy it. Okay, so cats, like most feliforms, are highly adapted to ambush hunting. Lions are the rare exception. They tend to openly hunt their prey like dogs do. They chase them down. Cheetahs as well, but again, it's more from a stalking position. They don't just run from long distance. Dogs will actively pursue their prey over long distance and gradually wear them down. Cats, being more binocular in their focus, or more orbital in their focus, they have large, very, very large eyes, disproportionately large eyes, and a comparatively undeveloped sense of smell, which we discussed. And the whiskers are highly sensitive and help cats navigate at night. And generally, the more developed the whiskers, it's indicative of how nocturnal that cat is. So something like a cheetah has very underdeveloped whiskers, almost non-existent, where something like a leopard or any of your true cats, your Felis sylvesticus or libicus or your domestic cats, they have very pronounced whiskers because they are almost exclusively nocturnal in their habits. And this is an interesting little thing, fun fact for the kids. The fact that they're true carnivores, they have no necessity to have taste buds that taste sweet substances. Dogs can, bears can, and most mustelids can. But cats cannot taste any sweet substances. They don't have the taste cells for sweet. All right, so a cat's skeleton is quite petite, quite delicate, and actually very, very, very flexible. So they're very flexible and very lightweight, and they're not as rigidly built. They're not as mechanical in what we consider like a piston function. And they cannot perform the same mechanical movements for a long period of time. They burn out quite quickly. Their parts are very petite, as I said, very, very finicky, and they can damage quite easily. So they are more specialized in stalking and ambushing and quick little bursts of energy and being over and done with for the day. So whereas a dog can just, as I said, we talked last time that a dog can walk or trot at 16 kilometers an hour for an entire day without even breaking a sweat. And unlike the canines, the flexibility of the limbs allow for better gripping, manipulation, and climbing. So they have very dexterous frontal limbs, and that gives them that ability to grab their prey, whereas canines almost exclusively rely on their teeth to do all the work. So this is a dog foot over here. It's they have these tendons over here, which allows for flexibility, but they're very superficial and they're almost non-existent. They have pretty much an upwards and downward motion when it comes to movement. Canines, by contrast, can extend the digits. They can turn left, turn right. They can almost perform like a hand. So they've really got quite nowhere near to the level that primates have got, or some like raccoons have got. But again, for an apex predator, it's very, very, very flexible. Okay, so they're extremely sensitive to movement, and being generally nocturnal, their eyes are built for seeing better at night. They have a low number of cones in their eyes, and these are special receptors, photoreceptors that pick up color. We've got an inordinate amount of them. We've probably got in the entire animal kingdom the highest number of cones, with the exception of birds. Birds far surpass us, but in terms of mammals, humans and chimpanzees to a less extent have got far better, they've got the highest number of cones. We've got very few rods by contrast, which are photoreceptors that pick up light. We've got terrible night sight. You go walking in the park in the dark, you know what I mean. Cats by contrast have phenomenal number of rods, and that gives them this incredible amount of, they can receive so much more light at night. And this is how you can see it over here. So you've got cones and rods. And you can see that the individual cones and rods will pick up either light or variances in color waves, and then it'll pass the information on to the brain. And the higher the number of the rods, it just picks up straight light, and it doesn't interpret it as color. Okay, another thing that cats have, and actually most mammals have, is something called a tapetum lucidum. We didn't discuss this last time because I was saving it for this lecture. And that is a reflective layer at the back of the eye by the retina over there. And this gives that wonderful glow-in-the-dark light that you see when you shine a light over an animal's eyes. And that simply just reflects the light multiple times inside the eye and actually just illuminates the image, so they get to see it better, sharper, and clearer. So they see far better at night than we do. We don't have tapetum lucidums. In fact, none of the primates have tapetum lucidums except for bush babies, the galagos, because they're exclusively nocturnal. There we go. That's your tapetum lucidum over there. You don't see that during the day. You only see that when you shine a light into a cat's eyes. Okay, so predation, cats typically stalk and ambush their prey. Only lions and cheetahs specialize in chase-based hunting, and even they're not as remotely as successful as canines. Canines, up to 70% of their hunts are successful. Lions, on a good day, 25%. Cheetahs, on a excellent day 15%. Cheetahs are getting an 85% failure rate with their hunts. So canines typically 70%, on a really bad day 50% of their hunts. So they're just, wherever you get these chase-based predators, the dogs just win. They're better at it. Hyenas, which we'll discuss next lecture, aren't dogs, but they are the feliform answer to dogs, and they are almost as successful as dogs in their hunts. Okay, so unlike canines, which typically maul and break down their prey and tear it to pieces until they die of shock and blood loss, cats asphyxiate their prey, which is far quieter, far more efficient, and they get away with a whole kill and they don't have to share. The benefit of this, of course, is that the animal is dead and it's quiet. It hasn't alarmed any of the other predators. It hasn't built up any lactic acid, so it actually tastes better. It also hasn't tired out the actual cat itself. The cat is actually fairly fresh, and you can get that kill out of that area, fairly intact and up a tree if he's a leopard, or under a bush, without other predators knowing about it. Whereas dogs, they've woken up the entire neighborhood on a hunt. Except with dogs being social, they tend to be able to defend themselves, except in Africa. And again, like I discussed earlier, the eyes and the whisker size is relative to the hunting time of the cat. Cats that are nocturnal have huge eyes. Cats that are more diurnal have slightly smaller eyes. And again, with the whiskers, diurnal cats have smaller whiskers. All right, so here you can see by contrast. Okay, another thing is that cats themselves, the nocturnal cats tend to have vertical slit eyes, whereas diurnal cats tend to have pinpoint eyes like we do. The vertical slits allow a greater line of light coming in during the night, and cats that operate during the day usually don't need that. Okay, so clawed cats. I'm sure you guys have all heard about cheetahs having permanently protracted claws, but most cats have what we call protractile claws. They're not retractile because they're not sticking out and they pull them in. They're sticking in and they push them out. So they're protractile, not retractile, because if they had to constantly retract them, they would be retractile. So they're protractile claws. And they're sheathed in skin. Okay, 3 species, not 1 species. I know that everyone hears about the cheetah having this, but actually 3 species. The one is the cheetah. There's a fishing cat, which occurs around India and Sri Lanka. And the other is the flat-headed cat, which comes from Southeast Asia as well. So all 3 species. And the flat-headed cat and fishing cat both are fish specialists, and they don't need, because they're slogging around in the mud half the time and catching fish, they don't need to have protractile claws. Their claws are permanently distended. Okay, body glands. I'm sure that you guys have noticed that your cats are constantly rubbing themselves on you and on everything. It's just not a sign of affection. It's also them marking you as their territory. And that's why cats always give you a sniff when you come in, when you've been rubbed up with other cats. And cats love, they wipe their tails and everything. They wipe their bum, their supracaudal gland. They rub that up against branches. Cats often love again, rubbing their faces all over you. And that's, again, just these glands. It's not just a sign of affection. He's actually just saying, you belong to me, your staff. Okay, and again, cats have phenomenal hearing, better than dogs. So humans can hear 64 hertz to 23,000 hertz, which is not bad. I mean, it's okay. It doesn't compare to bats. Canines double ours, 67, so they can't hear quite as low frequency as we can, but almost negligible. Seals, by contrast, remember, seals underwater can hear up to 70,000 hertz, so that's on a whole other level. Cats, by contrast, can hear these really deep sounds and these very high frequency sounds, and they're attributed this also to the fact that cats often hunting prey that is slithering under the ground and is making this very low frequency noises, scratching through the dirt or slithering through the dirt, and being able to hear those sounds very accurately is pivotal to their survival. Okay. So, the roaring cats, we're going to talk about the PANTHERINAE. And I love the name PANTHERINAE. It's still a bit dubious, but knowing my Greek, the name pan comes from all, and the word thera means beast or animal, which directly translates, it means the beast of all, or the greatest beast, which is just a great name for any predator. Okay, so large cats have low species diversity due to their low population count, high dispersal rate. When they're born, they move out of that area and they don't linger. Okay, and the adaptability of each individual species to a wide geographic ranges. Leopards, for example, cover half the earth. Just some only minor variants. And numerous subspecies occur within each species, but they're able to interbreed. So you can take a leopard from Sri Lanka and from South Africa, and they'll be able to interbreed. Like you can take a human from Sri Lanka and from South Africa, and they'll be able to interbreed. We do look different, though. And there are 7 species in total amongst 2 genera. The Pantherans, okay. There's only 5 species alive today. All extinct species are limited to Africa and Eurasia. Sorry, I lie, there's actually a mistake there. One exception. And the lion, the tiger, which we know, and the leopard, of course. And you can see with lion structures over here, they've got this really robust build, and they actually have this very straight spine compared to a lot of the cats. A lot of cats are very springy spines. And lions, because they're built like rugby players, they're impactors. They come in hard, they come in fast, they've got this really heavy leg structure and chest structure, and they're basically just packing weight. And they rely on strength and shock to hit rather than stalking and in the conventional sense with cats. So they're quite atypical amongst cats. If you look at a tiger by contrast, although this actually looks like quite a petite cat, this is a cat that would be 300 kilograms. And if you look at a cat weighing 300 kilograms and you compare the density and the thickness of bone structure, they're actually, most of their weight comes from muscle and not from the bone itself. They've actually got very light bones. Okay. Cats have been extirpated across the planet, and wherever humans have settled in history, typically, if not all, the megafauna have been extirpated. Cats have been some of the most hardest hit species on the planet, and this is partly due to the individual cat's highly territorial behavior. They have very small territories compared to canines, and again, very low population count. So when you kill one, you're losing 20 kilometers by 20 kilometers of occupation. And if you kill 5, you're losing 100 by 100. So, my maths is bad, but anyway. So basically, you're understanding that just killing a few of these predators out can have massive repercussions on a population and their existence in an area. Whereas you can blast a couple thousand impala, and within a few months, there's whole herds that have moved back in. Okay, so for example, this was the lion's historical range. They have concluded or found very conclusive evidence that they actually were as far as Spain and Italy and France as well until about 20,000 years ago. And as humans have moved into those areas, they've just annihilated them. So the present day distribution is in blue and the historical distribution is in red. There's one tiny remaining population in India. India is the only place on earth when you get the big 7. We'll talk about that later. We've got the big 5. And yeah, so unfortunately lions are no more across most of their native range. Tigers, by contrast, fare a little bit better, but again, around the Caspian Sea and Russia, parts of eastern and western China as well, they occur throughout all these areas, and they've been completely annihilated in these areas. Populations of Malaysia as well, they occurred, Indonesia, but again, gone. Leopards have remained fairly intact. Okay, so you can still see that most of their native range is intact, although it's far more broken up, but they have, next to wolves, probably the greatest distribution of one species of predator. And with a range going from the Cape through to North Africa, back through North Africa, right through Saudi Arabia, through the Arabian Peninsula, through India, to Java, Indonesia, northern China, and even as far as Japan. So the leopards, they're all over the place, but they vary in size. Cape leopards, for example, are 20 kilograms. Sri Lankan leopards are 110 kilograms. So you're dealing with, imagine if a human being weighing 40 kilograms to a human being weighing 300 kilograms. That's the contrast in size you're dealing with. Okay, and again, there are 9 different species of leopards found, subspecies or races found across the world. And they're probably more variable than any of the other big cats out there. So we also get other species, which of course is the jaguar, the only American species of big cat. Looks very similar to a leopard, and we'll discuss that now. And again, the snow leopard, which is limited to parts of Asia, okay, and critically endangered due to overhunting and to traditional medicines. Okay, so a lot of people have a hard time telling the difference between a leopard and a jaguar, but leopards tend to have more circular rosettes. Jaguars have these almost mechanical square-like structures with little dots inside them. The leopards tend to have a more elongated jaw, and you'll find that the jaguar has a square jaw, almost like a boxer's jaw. And the jaguar is a lot meatier and more robust. A leopard is more graceful and dainty. I mean, cats are all graceful and dainty, but but definitely the jaguar is built like a bit more like a lion in its structure. And interestingly, they're not actually very closely related. Lions and leopards are more closely related than jaguars and leopards. Jaguars separated millions of years ago, and they're distant cousins. They're still pantherans, but they are distantly related. Okay, and black panthers. There's no such species as a black panther. People will keep saying, oh, where do you get black panthers? And it's just a melanistic large cat. Typically leopards or jaguars, they have recorded lions before. There are rumors of cougars being black, no confirmed sightings though, and there have been sightings of black tigers as well, but typically it's leopards and jaguars. It occurs very commonly in jaguars. Okay, and this is combining two of the melanistic genes from both parents. If one parent carries it, it doesn't happen, but if both parents have it, then it carries through. Okay, so in leopards, it's a recessive gene, while in jaguars, it's a dominant gene. We're not going to go into genes today. It's a whole other story. Okay, and the other group, the other genus in the pantherans, the big cats, are the neophylis, literally meaning the new cats. And these guys are a little bit weird. So compared to the pantherans, these guys have enlarged, longer faces and then greatly increased upper canines, almost like a saber-toothed cat. There's only two species, the clouded leopard and the Bornean clouded leopard. Okay, almost identical except for the fact that one's obviously much darker than the other. And again, they're limited to a small part of Southeast Asia throughout Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Borneo, that area. Okay, now, all cats, with the exception of special domestic breeds, have white facial markings under their eyes. This encourages light to reflect under the eyes and give them better night sight. I'm sure you'll see these little white lines under the eyes. This guy over here doesn't have too much. But again, you can see it with the leopard over here. You can see it with the lion over here. And you can see it with the tiger over here. And this actually, white, as we all know, reflects light and reflects heat waves as well, light waves. And by reflecting them off, it allows the eyes to absorb those waves and gives them a better vision or a better absorption of light at night and just helps them see better. Okay, you won't usually find this with a lot of canine species because a lot of them tend to be more diurnal. Okay, so the FELIDAE, which are the small cats, and these guys have a bony hyoid and as such are able to purr. They make this vibrating sound, and they're far more diverse than the larger cats and far more specialized in their habits and their diet. There are 12 genera and there are 34 species. Of course, most people think, oh wait, isn't a cheetah a big cat? Actually, no, he's technically a small cat. So cheetahs, which are the ACIYONYX, there's only one species alive today, had a native range from North America through to Eurasia, and only recently, in the last couple 100,000 years, that's recent in terms of evolutionary history, colonized Africa. They originated in Asia, and there was a North American cheetah as well that went extinct about 15,000 years ago when the Native Americans moved in. They hunted them to pieces, apparently. Along with the North American lion, which was exactly the same as the African lion, but just a little bit different looking. Okay, so cheetahs are the most direct relative. The most direct relatives are the North American pumas, and they're highly specialized for running prey down, and as such prefer open grassland and bush. Open bush, not thick woody areas. They can hunt, but they tend to prefer these areas and they do better in them. So currently cheetah populations are in a sharp decline, and habitat loss is a major factor. We are returning all their native lands into farmland. I mean, everyone turns every bit of grassland into a forestry area or into farmlands, and of course this directly competes with cheetah. Human competition, whenever they go after cattle or for sheep, they just annihilate them. Hunting for either traditional purposes, there's a big market for them in Asia. Not as big as lions these days because there's just a shortage of them, but they've been completely annihilated in Asia. Remember, they used to occur throughout Asia until about 100 years ago, and now they don't. And trophy hunting as well is a big practice. People still love to shoot cheetahs, and that takes a hammering on their population. And the populations are in stark decline at the moment. So they also, because of this massive annihilation of their gene pool, they have what we call a genetic bottleneck, where we went from thousands of individuals to only a few individuals. And basically you're getting an Alabama situation where you're getting mothers and brothers interbreeding, you're getting cousins, second cousins, first cousins interbreeding, and it just plays hell with the genetics. So Because of this, and because of the size of the reserves and the fact that cheetahs historically used to move around and be very mobile, they needed ranges of a couple 100,000 hectares in order to live normally. And we don't have that anymore. It doesn't exist. So we have to move cheetahs around artificially. We have to take cheetahs out of a reserve every couple years and move them to a new area. I have a question. I don't know why you're not getting any audio. I think everyone should be getting audio. If you can't hear me, I'll upload the video afterwards. Okay, so this was the historical distribution range of cheetahs, and as you can see today, the present distribution range. I think the greatest range, of course, is in Algeria, but the population is very small. There's only around 250 individuals in that entire area. Okay, and to give you an idea, the Kruger National Park has around 150 cheetahs. But in the whole of Algeria, there's around 250 individuals occupying a range of that. There are some in Iran. I think there's like a dozen in Iran. But most of the original habitats have been annihilated. Okay, so less than 15% of cheetahs introduced into new areas survive in their first year. In fact, in some areas, it's only 5%. I did a workshop with Endangered Wildlife Trust last year, and the guy was a specialist in cheetahs, and the numbers are shocking when you see how few actually make it. So they're highly prone to stress, and the way they introduce these guys into their bomas is it's a whole science. And typically, cheetahs that are introduced from desert reserves into bush reserves have the best survival rate. They have about a 60 to 70% survival rate. They do well because hunting in a desert is hard, and they simply adjust far better than cheetahs moving into new areas, normal cheetahs. So maximum speeds of 128 kilometers an hour have been recorded, and that's just incredibly fast. But I think we all knew that. And the prey is typically just knocked down, they turn around and they grab the throat as quickly as possible and knock it out before anything else can get a chance to grab it. And you can see with the running, the cheetah is built like a spring. And basically, he works almost like mechanically. So the body works like a spring-operated piston, and each stride carries the cheetah up to 7 meters. A cheetah can make 3 strides within 1 second at top speed. That's incredible. And the tail acts as a rudder and a counterweight when the cheetah is running. So it's turning, it actually uses its tail to balance itself so it doesn't go tumbling over. And the claws are permanently extended, giving them traction when they're running. And again, not having to worry about operating those protractile claws when they're trying to chase down prey, like this boyki over here. And cheetahs are odd that they're the only FELIDAE that are social, truly social. And brothers often form coalitions, while females have been seen hunting with cubs. Prey is up to 6 times heavier. They've caught prey up to 6 times heavier themselves, but they usually lose these to bigger predators. Something like a wildebeest, a lion will come along in 10 minutes and chops it up. So, tear marks. I'm sure we've all seen the tear marks. And these tear marks are, the theory behind this is that they actually absorb the light and the glare and actually gives it better vision. You often see American football players doing this, one sportsmen around the world. South African rugby players don't do it for some reason. But there is strong evidence to show that it actually reduces glare around the eyes. It's not just to look cool. Pumas. And as again, these are the closest living relatives to the modern cheetahs. And they are limited to the Americas. Today, there is only 1 species, the cougar, otherwise known as the mountain lion. And when you look at his head like that, you can kind of see the relationship. Caracals are comprised of 2 species, and they're heavily built cats and are highly adaptable, and caracals themselves have a very wide range. So caracals range right throughout Asia, Southern Asia, through the Middle East into Africa, and whereas the African golden cat, this fellow over here, is only found in Central Africa. The CATOPUMAs, which are the Asian wildcats, and this genus is limited in geographic range and low numbers. Against Southeast Asia, only 2 species exist, the Asian golden cat, which is truly beautiful, and the Borneo bay cat, which again, critically endangered. I think they say that only about 2,000 individuals are known across the entire world. So a very, very rare cat to find. I could only find a couple of photos of it. Felis, which are common cats, they're widespread and highly diverse, but almost look all the same regardless of species, and most people would have the hard time telling a Chinese mountain cat from a normal house cat. They look almost identical. So there are 7 species. The African, we're not going to go through all of them. The African wildcat, probably the most important. The sand cat, this cute little guy over here. And the Chinese mountain cat, which I'm pretty sure looks like your local tabby. Okay, other genera include from the Americas, The jaguarundis, which is just one species, really weird. The leopardus, which are not leopards, just the scientific name, which include the ocelots, and which again limited to the Americas. The servals, which are limited to Africa, they used to occur in Asia, but again they've been removed through human interaction. The lynx, which are found throughout Europe and America, and they tend to be snow specialists, and they have very, very large feet. And short tails. The short tails is simply just an adaptation to hunting, as pretty much just brawlers. They don't need to have these long tails because they are, you know, effectively just brawlers in their environment. And of course, other genera include the Preannularus, which are these 5 little species, and this is the flat-headed cat over here, very critically endangered. Hard to find these guys, and not a lot known about them because they're so secluded and secretive. And that takes us to all the different cat species. We're not going to go through all the cats because there's not enough time. Okay, so domestication of cats. So all cats are descended of the African wildcat, Felis libica. And despite the name, the African wildcat has a native range from southern Africa to China. And there are numerous subspecies, which again, we're still debating whether or not we want to name them actual individual species or not. But at the moment, it's all just considered the African wildcat. And cats first started showing signs of domestication around 9,000 years ago. By 7,500 years ago, they were fully domesticated and very much a part of Egyptian culture. They were also independently domesticated in China, but the Chinese strains gradually got absorbed into the Egyptian strain. Okay, today we've got multiple breeds of cats, but because of the fact they tend to be less domestic, as in they are able to move on their own and we can't keep them controlled, they still interact with wild populations, and then we haven't fully bred out all their appearances of the wild populations out of them. So, of course, this brings us some problems, the impacts of domestic cats. And studies by various organizations worldwide have shown that domestic cats kill a shocking number of small animals. In the USA, the Smithsonian Institute states that cats kill around 4 billion birds and up to 22 billion small mammals annually in North America. Australian wildlife authorities state that over 300 million birds and similar numbers of reptiles and mammals are killed annually in Australia. And that is a wonderful little domestic cat taking out a native Australian cockatoo. Remember, Australia has no native cats or native placentals. So, shocking facts, introduction of domestic cats throughout the world has led to the extinction of 63 mammal, reptile, and bird species. If you want the list, Google the list. I told you about Laos, what was the name? Laos wren, or the island wren, flightless wren, and that was probably the most well-known example, but countless lizard species, snake species, mammal, rodent species have been annihilated. Also, a big factor is toxoplasmosis, which is horrific. It's not that dangerous to domestic cats, but it can kill very easily wild animals, including rats. In fact, it actually is a parasite, and it causes the rat to lose its fear of cats. And the rat actually, in many cases, runs to the cat out of curiosity. And that's actually, it's a evolutionary mechanism that it almost turns the rat into a zombie. The rat runs up to the cat eats the cat gets infected with toxoplasmosis, defecates plasmosis, the rat comes along and eats the cat feces, gets infected with toxoplasmosis, and the cycle continues. Other cats, animals like genets and civets can pick it up and they can die very easily from toxoplasmosis as well. But the zombification case with rats is fascinating. Another major concern is FIV, not quite as bad as HIV, but it can affect both domestic and wildcat populations. And numerous wildcat populations have been affected by the disease after exposure to feral domestic cats migrating into these areas where they were introduced. And FIV is far more dangerous to wildcats than domestic cats. Domestic cats can survive with it. Feral wildcats, being wild, tend to have a harder time surviving. All right, hybridization is a big concern, and they pose a threat to the genetics of the wildcat population. And beyond this, cats have behaved atypically when they get mixed with different hybrid breeds, and yeah, they can upset the local ecology. So we're finished for today, guys. Next class, we're going to have civets and genets. We're going to do hyenas, and we're going to do mongooses, and then talk a bit more about cat domestication. And I hope you enjoy that. We are running out of time, so we've got like 30 seconds left. I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for tonight. See you on Friday and then Saturday for Q&A. If you have any questions, you can message me.
It's all on Facebook.
Okay. I'll see you later.
It's like he's mentioned he's started with dinosaurs and predators, and then I think he